Friends, we gather together this afternoon to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Bart Gilbert. Bart's family so very much appreciates your presence here with them this afternoon, which offers them a great deal of comfort and support. Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are as a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the first of the Bible's 150 Psalms describes for us, as an introductory poem might want to do, describes for us in language that is both poignant and succinct the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades and whose fruit always flourishes. One of the most famous and certainly one of the most consequential and profound poems is the 23rd Psalm. If anybody knows something about biblical literature, it tends to be that psalm. It's deservedly famous because it combines both a sober-minded realism that life often assaults us with a variety of slings and arrows, but also rises to the level of optimism. It's not a naive optimism. It's an optimism that reckons with the problems of life. And in this psalm, the poet does not say that God solves these problems for us. We have to live in their presence, but we have to insist, as the psalmist gently does, on buoyancy, on moving forward, on optimism. Please join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Barton Gilbert died this past Friday at the age of 88. He lived a long and a rich life, and those who admired and loved him will never forget him. Now, I visited with Bart's family yesterday afternoon in order to prepare for the funeral today. And as I usually do, I begin our conversation by reviewing the order of this service and the interment service at the Mayfield Cemetery to follow. Then I reviewed the names of the family and their relationships to Bart to make sure we were including everyone. When we had finished all these important preliminaries, I asked the gathered group to tell me about Bart so that I could prepare a tribute to him, this eulogy. And knowing Bart as I did, not really well, but over the years I got to know him a bit, I certainly expected from those gathered together yesterday afternoon, I expected from them a variety of comments and praise of Bart's life and his accomplishments. But little did I expect the veritable flood of tributes of all kinds that poured forth from just about every one of the 18 people who participated in that conversation. And I could easily see, and I was so impressed by, how much Bart was loved as I listened to the family's accolades that were laced with humor and deep admiration. Here are some of the things about Bart that his family told me yesterday. The first thing I heard was a kind of paradox, that Bart was a curmudgeon with a soft heart. Oh, he could be stubborn and unsparing in his comments, especially when something displeased him. Indeed, Bart did not suffer fools. But he was at the same time warm and kind, approachable, and gregarious. One person said that Bart called everyone he loved on their birthdays every single year. So many in his large circle of family and friends. And when, with a bit of skepticism, I asked how many of those in the room had in fact been called by Bart on their birthdays, all 18 people raised their hands. Beyond that all-important birthday call, Bart expressed continual interest in what each of his family members and so many of his friends were doing. And his inquiries were far from perfunctory, because he asked in detail not only what his family and friends were up to, but how they were managing, how they were doing. And he showed up at as many family events as he could. In a word, Bart Gilbert was a person who valued others for the people they were, while at the same time he valued his friendship with them. He was indeed a warm presence with a generous spirit. In addition, Bart was a successful businessman. At first, he worked for his father, whom he regarded as his mentor, in his father's dry cleaning business. Already here, early in his life, Bart displayed his creativity by inventing the first biological patent in a certain area of the dry cleaning business. And throughout his work life, his entrepreneurial spirit shone through as his company, the General Environmental Science Corporation, became a global leader in developing bacteria-based products and thereby producing and helping to produce a lasting impact on environmental science. Bart Gilbert was a person who, in a word, loved life. He had a sharp wit, and he was a jokester. He had a quick and robust and sometimes cynical sense of humor. He possessed an indomitable optimism, an optimism which enabled him to face one adversity after another, and with persistence and grittiness, he simply refused to give up. Indeed, he was steadfastly unwilling to concede victory to his illnesses, and for an unusually long period of time, he succeeded. As one of his family members put it, Bart simply did not want to leave the party. In addition, he was deeply interested in the arts and in culture, and he and his beloved wife of 57 years, Elaine, were devoted supporters of the arts, contributing as they did to a variety of community initiatives, including those of the Cleveland Opera Company. In addition, Bart was a voracious reader. Spy novels, works of history, books on the nature and complexities of our government. Bart was always reading, and he was always learning. His children, Brian and Haley, clearly remember robust dinner conversations as they were growing up. Conversations that often centered around the news of the day, and on the perennial issues of politics. An interest that Brian and Haley continue to cultivate to this day. And Bart also kept informed about current cultural developments, not only because his appetites were large, but also because he didn't want to become irrelevant and thereby unable to communicate with a generation of his grandchildren and his nieces and his nephews. So he learned more and more about pop culture as he aged. Undoubtedly, the fact that he read 3 newspapers a day and worked the crossword puzzles every single day kept his mind sharp and his curiosity well attuned to what was going on. And so when we speak about Bart Gilbert, we have to use the language of many and not the language of some. Indeed, Bart had a wide variety of interests, and he devoted a great deal of energy and passion to each of them. Always uppermost in his mind was his family, especially his wife Elaine, his children, Brian and Haley, and his grandchildren, Grant and Drew, and about his many friends with whom he interacted often and deeply, in both his work and in his play. In fact, as one family member put it, Bart knew lots of people and in many different ways. And this is why an attempt to describe Bart's essence is bound to fall short. And I want to say something now about his beloved wife, Elaine. Elaine, you mentioned when we were together yesterday afternoon, a lovely custom that you and Bart richly enjoyed over the years. It seems that every day when Bart came home from work, you had a drink and hors d'oeuvres ready for the two of you as soon as he walked in the door. And then you would sit together, relax, and talk about the events of the day. A lovely way, day in and day out, to share life's experiences, as well as to share your devotion to one another. And to attach a certain pungency to your relationship, you both regularly exchange lots of humor, as well as comments filled with acerbic wit. Exchanges which, I suspect, in which both of you reveled, and comments, however acerbic, always filled with love. And as those gathered together yesterday afternoon insisted on emphasizing, and something which I myself witnessed from time to time over the years, how you, Elaine, were an extraordinary caregiver all these years, day in and day out, month in and month out, year in and year out. Another expression of your love for the person with whom you spent nearly 6 decades of marriage. Bart is survived by his wife Elaine, his son and daughter Brian and Haley, his daughter-in-law Alex and his son-in-law Adam, his grandchildren Grant and Drew, by his brother-in-law Jerry and his sister-in-law Judith, by many devoted nieces and nephews and other deeply supported family members, and by his wonderful caregivers, Sharon and Janet. He was predeceased by his parents, Bernard and Rose, by his sisters, whom he adored, Frances and Annette, and by his brothers-in-law, Stanley and Bob. Bart Gilbert lived a long and a full life. He was devoted to his work, his family, and his friends, and he made an indelible impact on all who knew and loved him. We will never forget him. Zichrono livracha. His memory will always be our blessing. Amen. And I want to call on several people who will talk about the life, the qualities, and the accomplishments of Bart Gilbert. First of all, his son, Brian.
This is not going to be easy. First of all, both literally and figuratively, my father was a big guy, and it's sort of unimaginable that so much would fit in such a small space. And that's not a fat joke. I'm going to keep this short but sweet because it's about all I can bear today. There was so much I wanted to say about my father, and so many avenues I went down before coming to the following thoughts. As I got older, I realized that my father and I differed in 2 distinct ways. First, he had a much better head of hair than I do. It was unbelievable, even to the end. And second, we had very different political views. Sometime during the George W. Bush presidency, he began referring to me as his communist son. And wondering whether I was more influenced by my Uncle Jerry than him. And to me, that was a compliment, but he definitely didn't mean it as a compliment. I'm sorry, Jerry. I bring this up because no matter how deep the divide on particular subjects, it never had an effect on our relationship. And that's because it didn't matter in our relationship. He dealt with our differences with humor and wit, and it taught me a dead serious lesson that has served me well both personally and professionally, and that is to isolate differences I have with others so as not to use them to paint people with a wide brush and demonize them. You can disagree with someone and still love and respect them. Case in point, Bart prioritized, was devoted to, and keenly interested in the activities of his family, and enthusiastically supportive of all of us during the best of times and especially during the lowest. My father made me feel safe, cared for, proud of who I am, where I come from, and most importantly, loved. I'll miss him dearly, and although I didn't always agree with how he voted in the grand scheme, it didn't matter. I think no matter your political stripes, my father's approach to the political divide and the people in his life is one from which I've taken an example and can make our society much kinder, more pleasant, productive, and less divided. It would make for a much better world. I'm going to miss him dearly.
Bart's daughter, Haley.
Thank you all for coming today. I could go on for hours, but we're keeping this short since there are so many of us who want to speak, which is only a testament to how Bart touched each of our lives. There are so many things you can say about my dad, Barton Gilbert, a.k.a. Bampa. He was a man with a very astute and wicked sense of humor. He was a naturally adept athlete, an avid golfer and tennis player. He had the foresight to found a company that was eco-friendly and environmentally sound long before its time. He loved parties, musicals, and the opera, and was incredibly well-read. He was so handsome, a looming force that washed over you as soon as he entered a room. But he was my dad. The man I knew was so much more than that. Although I left home at 18, I still talked to my father every morning of my life, even to the very end. My dad was our biggest cheerleader. He was a dad who showed up to sporting events, every play, and every graduation. He was interested in details and hourly happenings. Bart was eager to hear about Grant and Drew's tennis tournaments, new guitar pieces, the adventures we had on vacations. My dad was curious about Adam and my careers, our charitable events, and how we were pursuing hobbies that fed our passions. When I was younger, my dad would always perform silly duets with me, crack incredibly wicked jokes, and sing made-up Romanian love songs to my mother. And boy, did he love my mother like nobody's business. As my Uncle Jerry said, they were a couple you saw across the room and could feel their energy. I've tried to emulate that in my own marriage, because I had such incredible role models. And as a young woman, my dad always encouraged me to do anything I wanted to do. He urged me to be a fierce competitor on the field, in the classroom, and in life. My parents have been wonderful examples of how to raise a family. The four of us created a bond that was so unusual and so valuable to us. They gave us a gift in that bond. I have watched it in the way that my brother is an uncle to my children and how we love and care for one another's families. And my dad taught me how to fight. Through his own illness, my dad showed a tranquil stoicism, intense resilience, and graceful fortitude. The man with 29 lives. So when it came to my own battle with illness, I could look to my father on how to again be a fierce competitor and face my daunting fears as a warrior with bravery and determination. And Mom, you as a wife, a caregiver, and a friend gave so much of yourself. You are a true example of for better or for worse in sickness and in health. You not only loved the man until the end, but you showed an undying devotion and care that is rare to find. You are the truest representation of what it means to be a mate for life. I want to end this with a little story about what their love actually looked like. It was never ending and lifelong, but at times it definitely looked more like the Costanzas from an episode of Seinfeld. As Brian mentioned, we lived in a purple house. My mom, a progressive Democrat, my father, a Reagan Republican. My dad often felt ganged up on by the rest of us, but such was his lot in life. When my father could not walk anymore, and my mother was trying to get him used to using the walker, she planted a huge Biden for President sign in the front yard and told my father that he could take it out when he could walk by himself to go get it. My father stewed and seethed over that sign being in the front yard, but we delighted in it. My father soon after had an episode, and my mother called 911 to bring my father to the emergency room. When my father pulled out of the driveway in the ambulance, he abruptly told the EMTs to stop the bus. He ordered them to get out and take the effing Biden sign out of the yard on the way to the hospital. They obliged. He got his wish. Dad, we will love you forever. We have a Mack truck-size hole in our hearts today. We will remember you as our patriarch, our friend, and our example of a life well lived. You live on in our hearts, in your children and our children, and we will cherish your memory for as long as we live.
And now Bart's son-in-law, Adam, and his grandsons, Grant and Drew.
Many people speaking on behalf of Bart, or Bompa, the name I gave my grandfather, had the pleasure of knowing him for a much longer time than I had. But in the 17 years I knew my grandpa, I still knew that his personality could be summed up in 3 words: wisdom, selflessness, and a short temper. Every time I came to visit, I would sit on the piano and try to master chopsticks until the words, "Cut it out," came from the other room, and I stopped. But there was no emotional tie to this statement. In fact, it often led to me watching the Indians game with him on the recliner for hours. The foundation for our decades-long bond of sports. Sports served as a major common ground for me and my grandpa. Bompa took me to my first baseball game, watched football with me on Thanksgiving, and would talk for hours about how shitty the Browns were. And they really were. The most important thing, though, is how involved he was in my tennis. One of the many reasons I got into tennis and pursued it so vigorously was his constant support as an avid tennis player in the Army. At Beachmont summer camp, he knew everyone I was playing and would watch me for countless hours, just happy that he would see me, that he could see me play for the short time I was in Cleveland. Over the years, while I was away from Cleveland, my mom called him almost every day in the car. And though our conversations were always short, they didn't need to be long or end in "I love you," because that's who he was to me. Someone who didn't need long, meaningful conversations or grand gestures, just to know that he was part of his grandson's life, and I felt it. I truly knew how proud he was. And now I know that he's up there somewhere with a permanent first-row seat on the 50-yard line, watching me and hoping to be there for every moment of my success and the success of his loved ones. Finally, as Brian said, thank you for the hair. I really appreciate it. And that's all that will be said today. Thank you.
than I thought it'd be. Hey Bart, or as me and my brother know him, Pampa. I just wanted to start off by saying that I love you so much. Nothing can show how much I love you, but this is... Sorry. You were always there for me and my brother and just wanted to see us succeed. And even though you did not get to fully see us grow up into the adults that you wanted us to be, and that you knew we would become, I know that you were watching over us right now, and will continue to see us become the men you want us to be. Every time I would see you, you never failed to make me put a smile on me or in my brother's face, or anyone's face. Every single person here has at least one funny memory of you taking them to a movie or just making a joke. You were always there. You were always the life of the party and never wanted to miss anything. Every single gathering or event, you were there just trying to put a smile on everyone's faces and just so happy to be with the people you loved. Even when you were restricted to a wheelchair, you still tried to see everyone and be with everyone. I'm so happy that you made it to LA for Thanksgiving and that I was able to see you one last time. It really meant a lot to spend that time with you, and it really meant a lot to spend that time with you, and that you could be with us. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty incredible, Drew. It's a real testament to your grandfather, that the love that he has for you and how much it affects you. It's very beautiful. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to thank everyone who came here today. A lot of my friends, Haley's friends from a long distance. It's really incredible. And it's a real tribute to Bart and to his family and his friends. I'm honored to speak. I had the pleasure of knowing him for half of my life, and he was nothing but supportive of both myself and most importantly, my family. He was, as everyone said here, a great guy, but we shared something in common, and that is, regardless of their protestations to the contrary, we are married to very similar women. I know no one here, other than them, will challenge this. So while they make mental notes over there trying to figure out all the discrepancies, which there are very little, I'll tell you one of my favorite Bart anecdotes. I, like many here, was always impressed that Bart seemed to be able to roll along in life, quite secure and frankly relaxed with his choices. While proverbial chaos may have reigned around him, he would seemingly be able to take it all in stride. One specific day, and I don't recall the details, not very important, Elaine was frustrated with something, and I looked at him and I simply asked him whether whatever was bothering her also bothered him. And he deadpanned the following: "Adam, I think she does enough worrying for the both of us." And just like that, I knew he gave me the secret to a happy marriage to a Gilbert. He and Elaine made it 57 years, so Haley, you and I have a lot of work to do, and I look forward to it. So Bart, thanks for such great advice, but in all seriousness, thanks for being so supportive of all of us for all these years. For me, you were a model in many things, and I will, of course, appreciate our time together, but even more importantly, the time you spent with my boys. Lastly, Elaine, I would be remiss if not thanking you for being such an incredible grandmother, mother-in-law, and wife. These last few years, as my wife said, you showed all of us what dedication means. He was lucky to have you, fighting for him as hard as he fought for himself, and you no doubt gave him several extra years. Thanks.
Bart's brother-in-law, Jerry.
Dear Elaine, Haley, Brian, Alex, Adam, kids, family, and friends, as I told the group yesterday when we were gathered with Rabbi Klein, the four of you have taken all of my material. I'm not going to say anything. In fact, I don't think I'm coming to the funeral. It seems like only yesterday that Bart and Elaine were engaged. I remember the morning well. I was at my parents' when they found out. I was with them. My mother was all nerves. There's something about that theme today. Lots of emotional energy and management. And she had to adjust to losing a daughter. But she knew she was gaining another child in the process. But really was unsure as to whether this was the worthy prince for the wonderful woman that they had raised. I didn't know then that this would be a test run for my mediation career, because it was one of the hardest cases I've ever encountered. Things didn't improve much by the time of that wedding day in July. The hottest July 3rd in Pennsylvania history, I think, with people almost melting before one's eyes. Downhill from there when, as a joke or so I thought, I placed a shot glass under Bart's foot at the end of the ceremony instead of flashbulbs. As his foot crashed down, he groaned with his eyes speaking to me as if to ask, "Are you really one of the good guys? Elaine told me you were a good guy." He liked good guys. He was a good guy. Despite that rough start, Bart quickly became a part of the Weiss family, being embraced by my parents as a son, and his eagerly reciprocating with affectionate use of mom, dad, when addressing my parents, and he meant it. And we all had a great time together. Gosh, did we have fun. I'd found a brother, and I hope he felt the same way. He was a cool guy, and I was sort of square. Elaine liked cool guys. It was such a great compliment that on that Sunday night in September of 1968, after I just moved to Cleveland, Bart came to my little apartment in Cleveland Heights as I was moving in to celebrate Brian's birth that day. We had a cigar and drank scotch, just the two of us. And he just sat on my wooden floor, gazing out into space with a very satisfied look on his face. Yes, on my floor. Imagine that. Bart at 32, trim, sliding with his back against the wall down to the floor. And I'll never forget that image. As you might have gathered by now, Bart Gilbert was a big man, not only physically, but he was larger than life in many ways. He lived a big life, a full life, and it was well lived. And over the decades, a good time was a large part of that life, and why not? And we shared a lot of fun for the better part of a century, but who's counting? There's little doubt that Bart enjoyed that good time and the smiles and laughs and Gruber's and the Virginian and the Wagon Wheel and Cadillac DeVille, that came with it were so much a part of who he was. But beneath his enjoyment of life, there was another large piece of Bart that wasn't as obvious as his joie de vivre. While he exuberantly enjoyed life, he had a serious fortitude and dignity that challenged even death. For these past recent 4 or 5 years, as he struggled with one physical challenge after another, I always left my visits with Bart with a strong sense that he was working so hard to maintain the grace and dignity and politeness of the gentleman he aspired to be and that he was. I know that he had his frustrated and even angry moments as he fought so hard to deny what was inevitable for all of us, but not staring us in the face as it did him. And yet there was scarcely a conversation in all of that difficult time when he didn't ask about other people in the room. More than small talk, genuine talk, authentic talk. After all, Bart was an open book, something I truly appreciate. It might not have been the book that I always agreed with, or the book that I necessarily read with a lot of diligence, but he was an open book. Simple questions were recently the easiest for him in my encounters with him. How have you been? What's Dan up to? What's he doing? Did you and Judith enjoy the trip? And the inevitable, I think the Browns might have a shot this year. What do you think? Stuff aimed at making other people comfortable, no matter how uncomfortable he might have been. Always the great host, even in the direst of moments. Like most good people I know, he was someone who was willing to listen and not talk. Give and not take. Relate to people in a manner beyond mere transaction. Reflect and not react immediately. All the while being under the ravages of nature's worst forces, as deep inside he was fighting to live, not just for himself, but for those around him whom he loved so deeply and was so proud of, his beloved kids and their spouses and their kids and nieces and nephews, and above all, you, Elaine, his beloved wife, partner, and pathfinder. After all, this larger-than-life man was luckily paired with a woman of equal, if perhaps not even greater, force and energy. Somebody who personified marital love and dedication, fiercely protective and loyal to your beloved husband and family. I often wondered in recent years, even worried, about where the next gram of energy and resilience might come from. And then you'd surprise us. You'd wake up the next morning, renewed in your devotion and positive spirit. You have been supernatural. And he knew it every minute. And yet here we are, these great spiritual tectonic plates of mortality and eternity rubbing up against each other, which we can really never fully ponder or appreciate, as no one's ever reported back to us after they've left the mortal world for the eternal. Of course, we think about it. We seek to make some sense of it, but such thoughts are usually returned to that inscrutable drawer somewhere in our heart and soul, because the questions raised can never really be answered, and all we can provide is comfort. Bart was a reader. Mystery, murder, politics, whatever you threw his way, he ground through the written word with voracious curiosity. I don't think he was much of a fan of poetry, but I suspect he might have embraced the insight of one Emily Dickinson sitting in that imaginary carriage, who put the enigma of eternity and mortality wonderfully in verse that was never published until she herself passed away. It's called Because I Could Not Stop for Death, and I'm only going to read a few pieces of that verse. The beginning is, Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. And it ends with, we paused before the house that seemed to swelling in the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than a day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Dear Elaine and family, we love you. We all share your sorrow and are there steadfast as your fortress during this difficult time, which we trust will pass and will bring relief. We all know, and I'm going to echo what Rabbi Klein said, that Bart's memory will always be a blessing for all of us. Thank you.
O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. As you are able, I invite you to rise now for the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim shochein bamromim, hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina. Im kadoshim utahorim kazohar haraki amazhirim et nishmat benish ben Baruch v'shoshana shahalach la'olamo. Bala rachamim yastireo b'sefer kanafav la'olamim v'yitzror b'tzror hachayim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Bart Gilbert, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. You may be seated. I want to announce that the family of Bart Gilbert will receive friends at the Beachmont Country Club today, immediately after our interment service and until 8 o'clock this evening. They will also receive friends tomorrow, Tuesday, at the Residence at 31899 Chestnut Lane in Pepper Pike. They will receive friends in the afternoon from 2 to 4 and in the evening from 7 to 9. Our service will now continue at Graveside at the Mayfield Cemetery. And once again, on behalf of the family, your presence means so much to the family at this particular time in their lives. Thank you for being here.